Yes. All right, perfect. So listen, one day Jesus, it was towards the end of his ministry, and he was with his disciples, and they were in Jerusalem, and they were at the temple. And what we have to understand about the temple is we have to understand that it's so hard for us to understand what the temple meant to these people. Like, this is a 600-year-old building, which they had to rebuild. Like, it was actually older, but they had to rebuild the thing, and it was 600 years old, and it was the center of everything. And when I say everything, I mean, like, it was the center of their religion. It was where you offer, sacrifices, and that's how they worshipped. And it was the center of their kind of national identity, because when they had holidays, and when they had these festivals and stuff, they were all in Jerusalem, and they were in and around this temple. Like, if you were a Jewish human person, you were born into a world where you looked, and the temple was just this always omnipresent force in your life, hopefully for good, usually for good, though, as we talk about in other sermons, sometimes it doesn't always go so good. But the temple was just so important. It was at the center of who they were as Jewish people, as religious people who worshipped Jehovah, just everything. It just meant so much to them. And so it was shocking. It was beyond shocking when Jesus told his disciples, hey, look, there's coming a time, and it's coming quickly, when this temple is going to be destroyed. He said, the way he put it, that not one stone would lay on top of the other. And I think it's interesting because, the disciples always argue with Jesus about everything. It's kind of their thing. And yet in this case, it was like, this was such an alarming sentence. It was such a crazy thing to be told. It's like they forgot to argue. Like they forgot who they were for a minute. And Jesus tells them the temple's going to be destroyed, and all they can think to ask is like, how? When? Jesus, you've got to tell us more about that. And so Jesus did. And he gave one of his most famous prophecies, predicting the future, and he told them that, okay, well, they can pay attention for a few things, and there's some things he doesn't want them to do. He said, first of all, you're going to hear that there's rumors that wars are going to begin. And he said, guess what? Those rumors are true. There are going to be wars. And it's going to be nation against nation. It's going to be stuff you don't want to see. And so what Jesus said is, look, when you hear about all of this, you're going to be tempted to join in. You're going to be tempted to take a side, to take up arms, to join a rebellion. I'm going to need you guys not to do that, Jesus said. Because he knew what that was going to end in. And if all of his disciples are in this rebellion, well, Christianity is not going to work very well. And so it's not just going to be about war. It's going to be about other stuff. You're going to have, earthquakes. You're going to have natural disasters. You're going to have famines. You're going to have pestilence and disease and pandemics and kind of all at once as the world is descending into war. The world is descending into war. All these other terrible things are going to happen. And he said, what's going to happen is when the terrible things happen, when the stuff happens where, you've got the natural disasters and the sicknesses and illnesses, when all this stuff happens, you're going to be tempted to look for help from somebody. And there's going to be an abundance of people who are going to say, I'm the Messiah. I'm the king. I'm the leader. Come follow me. Come do what I say. Come join my group. And Jesus said, I need you guys to not. Don't do that. Don't follow those guys. Don't panic. Don't do any of that. I need you to not go to war, and I need you not to panic. And it's funny because I know that Jesus knows that the last thing that people do when you tell them not to panic is not panic. Like usually when you say don't panic, people are like, oh man, there's a reason to panic? I should do that. And so he wanted them to understand, so he was upfront with them. He said, okay, look, I'm going to give it to you straight. You're not going to like this next part. I promise you, okay? You guys are going to face persecution. Now, this was before Jesus died, which means that no one had died for being, following Jesus yet, including Jesus. For them, persecution at this point in history is maybe that old guy in that town is arguing with you about the Bible. Or these guys are like, we'd like to make you our king, and Jesus has to leave. Or, they tried to kill him, but they were really incompetent at killing, so they didn't. so far, we don't have any real persecution to the church. And so this was really surprising that Jesus would tell them this, that, hey, look, it's going to be, it's going to be bad. You're going to get arrested. You're going to be imprisoned. You're going to go to trial. You're going to be betrayed by your friends and your families, your brothers, your sisters, your mom, your dad. Like, everybody's going to betray you, and you're going to have to go to trial. And he said, but look, I need you to know this is all good news. I need my message spread. And every time you get arrested and every time you go to trial, you get to tell new people about me. And so Jesus kind of painting this picture of this terrible world, this terrible circumstance where the church is being persecuted, where Christians are being persecuted, where there's wars, where there's pestilence, where there's, natural disasters, where everybody's kind of joining, different sides. And then Jesus said, okay, look, I'm going to tell you, and this one I need an action point on. Okay. Everybody stick a pin here. Jesus says, there's going to come an army big enough to surround Jerusalem. And when that happens, I need you to get out. I need you to run. If you're in the city, get out. Drop everything you're doing and run. And if you're in Judea, surrounding Jerusalem, you're not far enough. I need you to go to the hills. I need you to go to the mountains. I need you to go to the caves. Because bad things are about to happen, and I need you guys to just... Here's what Jesus said. He said, it's going to be horrible for nursing mothers and pregnant women. And that's a phrase that's rolled around in my head for like 20 years. Like, what does he mean by that? Of all the ways you're going to explain a situation, why use that illustration? And I think I've figured it out. You see, when society works, when society is a reasonable society, there are certain people that we protect at all costs, and I mean all costs. Women, children, particularly when they're connected. Pregnant women and women who are nursing. A reasonable society, a society that is in any way functional, gathers around women who are nursing and gathers around women who are pregnant, and everyone stands in the line of fire so that they don't. It's partly compassion, it's partly evolution. We need the species to go on. But look, the point is, the society that is functional will protect these people, and what Jesus is saying is, it's going to be worse for them than anybody, which is Jesus' way of saying society will have completely fallen apart. Now, if you're a Christian, this is not going to be a surprising sentence, but Jesus was a pretty good prophet. Everything he said happened. Like 30, 35 years after he said it, this all happened. And the people who were there, they witnessed all of this, at least from various vantage points around the empire. See, in 66 AD, a rebellion happened, and they went to war. By they, I mean the Jews, went to war with the Romans. And you might think that's a stupid idea, and you'd be correct. It was a stupid idea, but the Jews had over 100 years of oppression, and they just thought, forget it. If we get wiped out, it's worth it to try. Well, they got to test that. See, I don't want to get too grisly. History gets real grisly. I'll just say this: when Rome showed up and went around, they sieged Jerusalem. They surrounded them. They surrounded them for years. And when they finally kind of went in and just took everybody out, the mercy they showed wasn't much. We think estimates, according to the people back then who lived it, were about 100,000 slaves. On the other hand, there were over 1 million people that died. That was your ratio. Over 1 million Jewish people died. And then another 100,000 were taken as slaves. It was the worst, inarguably the worst moment in Jewish history up till that point, and arguably since. I mean, you talk about 1 million people dead. That's a lot of people in one battle, in one war. And changing the face of Judaism forever, destroying 600 years of culture and religion, the temple was, in fact, destroyed. Interestingly enough, the people Jesus spoke to listened. We're also told by history that sometime around the army showing up, Christians got out of Jerusalem like rats off a ship. And they fled to the hills, and they survived, and their story went on in a way that, for other people, it did not. Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the disciples who Jesus spoke to. I want you, look, if we can't do it this way, let's do it with ways that we understand. So let's imagine that the year is 1910, and some time traveler tells you, hey, in Japan, there's going to be the culmination of this massive war. And there's going to be these 2 nuclear bombs. You don't know what a nuclear bomb is yet, I know, but there's going to be 2 nuclear bombs that are going to be dropped and destroy these cities. It's going to be the worst thing humanity's ever done to each other. And 30, 35 years beforehand that it's going to happen. Or imagine it's, like the 1960s. The world's going crazy in America in the 1960s. You're wondering, are we going to survive anything, right? Like, are we going to go to war with the USSR? Are we, we're doing like bomb drills in schools and stuff. Like, are we going to survive this? And you find out, time traveler shows up and they're like, hey, look, okay, things are going to get weird. Let me tell you about Woodstock. It's going to get weird. But you're all going to survive that. And then like 35 years later, some dudes are going to take these planes. They're going to fly them into the World Trade Center. And it's going to set up like endless wars around the nation, around the world. And thousands of people will die in like the worst terrorist attack in this country. Like, 9/11 is going to happen, guys. And it's going to be awful. Or imagine, it's like the early 1800s, right? 1820, 30, something like that. And tension is high. But at least we're not going to go kill each other until the time traveler shows up and tells you about the Civil War. And then, the assassination of Lincoln. And you're going to say, man, how are we going to survive that? It's going to be touch and go. Imagine, this big historic event, this violent act, this terrible act that's going to kill millions of people. This is spark wars. What would you, as a person who believes in God, do? What would be your very first inclination? Well, if you're like most people, you would pray. And you would believe, given as you do, that your prayer could make a difference. That you could ask God to step in and intervene. That God could change the hearts and the minds of world leaders, or God could step in and make sure that that rebellion doesn't happen, or these terrorists aren't trained, or whatever it might be. We believe that when we go to God and we ask God for things, that God changes things. That's the whole idea of prayer. If we didn't believe that God intervenes in some way in the world, why would we ask God to do anything? If that's not a thing that God does, why would we worry about it? And so you would pray reasonably. And the Bible would tell you that that would be a good thing for you to do. Because after all, the Bible tells us that prayer can move mountains. The Bible tells us that prayer that prayers are these powerful things. Jesus' brother James, the pastor of the church at Jerusalem in the first century, he writes this letter. And he's talking about the things that we should do. And he talks about prayer. And he talks about, if you grew up memorizing Bible verses, the prayer of a righteous man is effective. A righteous prayer that is effective. And James talks about this in such a sense. He talks about like sick people being healed. That if you're righteous, then you can ask God and God will heal sick people, or things like that. And he tells this old story about this prophet named Elijah. Elijah prays to God, and God says, okay. And what Elijah prayed for was that it not rain for 3 years. And God said, yeah, cool, no problem. That's the way when we read the Bible about prayer, that's the message that we are usually given. That's sort of the idea that we have, that we pray so that God can intervene, and that there's really no limits to that. Between, hey, I've got a fever and I need healing, all the way up to it's not going to rain for 3 years. we have this idea that in faith, if we are righteous, if we trust in the Lord, that God can do these things, and that God not only can do these things, but very often does do these things. And I'm not here to contradict any of that. I mean, like, unless that you think that's what it is all the time. Because as it turns out, Jesus tells the disciples to do something. And what that something is to pray. But he doesn't talk about God intervening in the world. This is what we read in the Gospel according to Luke. This is what Jesus tells the disciples they should do now that they've got all of this information about the war and all of the stuff. Jesus says, watch out and don't let your hearts be dulled by carousing and drunkenness and by the worries of this life. Don't let that day catch you unaware like a trap. For that day will come upon everyone living on the earth. Keep alert at all times and pray that you might be strong enough to escape these coming horrors and stand before the Son of Man. Jesus wants his disciples to pray, but he is directly telling them that the things they would usually pray for are not things they should pray for. I mean, he literally says that day will come upon everyone living on the earth. He says this is like this fixed point in time. It's going to happen. God is not going to intervene and change the minds of these world leaders. He is not going to intervene and stop this rebellion. He is not going to intervene and stop these terrorists. He's not going to stop these people from doing this. This is going to happen. The war is coming. The temple will be destroyed, and it will be absolute agony. Society is going to crumble, says Jesus. He doesn't tell us to ask God not to do that or not to allow that. Not what he says. Instead, he just says, this is going to happen. So he tells them to do two things. He tells them to live right. And that sounds like a very high and moral thing, but yeah, you know, like if he's wanting them to pay attention. I haven't told you exactly what's going to happen. I need you guys to pay attention. You know, there were people. We know the church gets out, but there were other folks that kind of weren't paying attention, and they got stuck in the city. Because once Rome showed up and they circled the wagons, nobody got in or out. That was the whole point of circling. If you're out of the bar every night and you're not paying attention, and you wake up hungover, like, hey, where'd everybody go? Where'd my buddies go? You're in the city now, and you're gonna die. So that's the first thing. It's just don't be doing that. But the second thing he said is, I want you to pray. And what do you pray for? That you may be strong enough to escape these coming horrors and stand before the Son of Man. I don't think Jesus is exactly talking about surviving here. Because that whole stand before the Son of Man, what Jesus is saying is, look, this war is inevitable. This destruction of Jerusalem, inevitable. The temple, it's inevitable. You staying faithful to me through all of this awful stuff, that is not inevitable. You can very sincerely want to make it, and you might not. You can right now have your best intentions in mind, but you might not make it. You may completely give up on your faith. This is a moment in time that I just need to throw this out here. We all know people in our lives who used to be Christians and now they're not. And I think sometimes we get very, very, like, it freaks us out. And I think part of what freaks us out is our own selfishness. Right? Especially like when it's somebody you used to look up to, or especially when it's somebody that you like is like, you know, you love and you respected their opinion and right? Like, especially then, what's scary is you look at that person and you say, well, that could be me. And so what we do to make ourselves feel better is we come up with this nonsense. We say, well, if you used to be a Christian, but you're not anymore, well, you were never really a Christian in the first place. You were never sincere in the first place. Aside from the fact that I've never been able to judge anyone's sincerity, like by looking at them or listening to them, we as human beings, we are famously bad at judging people's sincerity. Like, you guys realize that the entire concept of stealing from people through scams only works if we are bad at understanding sincerity. We're bad, okay? Other than that, here we have a really good example of disciples that Jesus is speaking to. That he's saying, pray you make it. Pray that you are strong enough. Because you might not make it. You might give up. You might quit. You might look at what's around you and say, well, I'm joining that army. I'm doing this, or I'm doing this rebellion. I'm going to follow this other guy. You might do it. So pray that you don't. Pray for the strength to hold on to your faith. This prayer is an interesting one, this instruction, because what Jesus is saying is, look, the world is rough. It's bad. There's bad stuff going on in this world now, okay? And I don't want you to seek an out. I don't want you to ask for God to intervene to change it. What I want, forget that prayer. What I want you to pray for is that you're strong enough, you're working enough, your faith is enough, so that no matter what happens in this bad stuff over here, you're fine. Instead of worrying about God changing the bad stuff, you should ask God to change you so that no bad stuff can impact you, is the prayer. And I'm tempted, now that I've said that, now that we've kind of gotten that out there, that we're talking about bad stuff, God's not going to intervene, so instead God changes our hearts and molds our hearts so we're strong enough to make it through the bad stuff. I'm tempted to think this is like a one-off, like a unique situation. The destruction of Jerusalem is obviously it's a unique situation. We don't always have blatantly obvious terrible things like that in our lives. And so I want to just say, well, this is just the way that it worked in that one circumstance and for those people in that space. But a couple weeks ago, we started this series, and one of the passages we read was the passage where Jesus' disciples ask Jesus to teach them how to pray. And we talked about how then it's good, like we need to learn how to pray. That's the whole pray better prayers thing that we're talking about in this series. Like we need to learn how to pray better. Okay. I never actually gave an answer to that. We just said they asked and then kind of just left it. We should fix that. It's 3 weeks later. Let's answer that part of the sermon. So this is what happens in the gospel according to Luke. Once again, we read this. It says, Jesus said to them, being the disciples, when you pray, say, Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive everyone who's indebted to us. And lead us not into temptation. Now, right away, let's say two things. First of all, that is kind of something you know. And let me just say, I don't know why Matthew gets all the publicity. The Lord's Prayer is in 2 different Gospels. We only ever quote it from Matthew. Darn it. Let's give Luke some love. Same thing, that's just Luke's rendering of it, okay? That's the first thing. A little weird, but whatever. The second thing is, you guys know me. If you're new, trust me. Listen, I do not ever want to disrespect other Christians or other churches or other denominations or other movements or other whatever, okay? And so I promise that's not what I'm trying to do here. You'll notice we did not recite the Lord's Prayer during this morning's sermon or this service, and we've never really done that. And a lot of churches do. And for centuries they have. And here's why we don't, okay? There's nothing wrong with this prayer. It's just we see pretty quickly after this several times in the New Testament where Jesus prays. And you know what he doesn't do? Recite this. Like there's several times where he prays. We're going to talk about them over the next few weeks as we continue through the series. Jesus, this is the prayer that he teaches the disciples to pray, but also then he doesn't do it himself when he prays. So is Jesus a hypocrite? No. Of course not. What this is not a formula. This is not something we're just supposed to repeat over and over, though you can if you feel like it. What this is a theological construct of what a good and healthy prayer looks like. In other words, we're looking for the concepts of what's going on here, and then we can take those concepts, those ideas, and then put them into our prayers. It's easier if you see it. Let's just start with one of the points, okay? The very first thing, hallowed be thy name. Okay? Some Bible translations translate it so that we can know what that means. Because I don't use the word hallowed ever. Even at like Halloween, people are like, oh, it's All Hallows Eve. I don't know what that means. I'm 40 years old and I have not a clue what that means. Okay? Hallowed is not a thing that I understand. So other translations help us out here, and they say, may your name be kept holy. So the first part of the prayer is that we are asking God that his name be kept holy. That means, off the very top, that we should say this. If we are asking God that his name may be kept holy, what we are admitting is that in the world in which we live, God's name is not kept holy. It's a really simple principle, but it's kind of obvious. And I'm not talking about cussing. Come on, guys. We're adults here, unless you're not an adult, and then when you're ready for an adult conversation. This is not about cussing. Jeez Louise. That was like offensive in 1952, guys. Jeez Louise, like Opie would get his, mouth washed out with soap for saying Jeez Louise. And now I say it, it's all folksy. That's just how language works, okay? It's not it. What we're talking about is that people don't honor God's wishes. The name of God, what he has shared with himself, shared of himself with us, right? We are all made in God's image, and God has shared with all of his creation who he is. We're told in the Bible that the entire universe is filled with Christ, right? God's name is out there, but we profane it by the way that we live. We profane it by the things we care about, the things we don't care about. We profane it, Jesus teaches us, by the way that we treat other people. Which means if we're asking God for his name to be kept holy, we are saying, God, your name is not kept holy, but we'd like to do that. And of course, the answer to that prayer can only be found in what? It's not in God's intervention. It's in our action. If the world is not keeping God's name holy, then what this prayer is saying is the world's not keeping your name holy, but God, I would like to. God, help me to do that. So we have a problem, and the solution is us partnering with God to do his work in this world. Hallowed be thy name is us saying problem, solution. Okay. You can see it in the next one that I'm going to talk about real easy. One that I've always enjoyed is, give us this day our daily bread. Okay, if you're of a certain age, you remember that little magazine we used to have in church. If you're of a certain age. If you're the rest of us, that's just a kind of a strange thing. Asking God for food is a weird thing on its face. Look, there's a lot of ways in which we as human people in the United States of America have not really taken care of one another. I don't think that's a controversial statement. I'm not trying to get political. I'm just saying, we don't, there's a lot of ways in which we're not great at this. But I would argue we're pretty good with food. Okay, let's just off the top, most of us have food in our pantry right now. Most of you, if the apocalypse hits, the zombies show up, you're like, cool, I'll see you in a month. I can board up my windows and I can eat canned goods for a month because that's what we got. Literally the other day, I was like, I need something to go with this. And I just sifted through and I was like, corn. I don't know when I bought that. It's probably expired. It's fine. We all have that. And if you don't have that, chances are really good you have money in your bank account, and we have a Mosher's. I don't need to ask God for that. I can just go to the store. And if you don't have that, maybe you're on food stamps, because we as a society decided that people shouldn't starve because they don't have as good of a job as other people. Shocking. We're pretty good at this, right? This is the part that we are good as a society at. We feed people. And if all of that fails, you can go up to ABC twice a week and get food from there. And if you're hungry before that, you can go to Columbia and get food from there. We're very good at food. So it's weird that in the Lord's Prayer, we are asking God for food when we're real good at food. But see, I don't think this is about food at all. I really don't, because it doesn't say food. It says bread. And here's what is very obvious about bread. Bread doesn't grow on trees. There is no bread tree. Ah, yes, I will plant the sourdough tree this year, and I will get sourdough all through the summer. We don't do that. You don't dig bread out of the ground. It doesn't grow on vines like watermelons over here and French loaves over here. It's not how bread works. How does bread work? You take a bunch of stuff that comes out of the ground. We mix it all together. You add heat and other stuff, and it comes out, and you butter it like toast. Right? Bread is a participation situation. It's something that we do as a community. It's something that we do with God. Some food does come out of the ground. You just eat it. But that's not what we're supposed to ask for. We're supposed to ask for bread, which is a fancy way of saying we should be asking God for something to do. We got this problem, right? There's all sorts of problems in the world. All sorts of stuff. People need bread. Stuff needs doing. So we ask God, can you give me something to do? Can you give me a purpose? Can you give me a reason to get out of bed in the morning? Asking God for our daily bread is asking God for something to do each and every day that we wake up. And it helps us and it helps other people, and that's just the way it works. We've got a problem and we've got a solution. Every single part of this is like that. The forgiveness thing is easy. We ask for forgiveness as we forgive others. That translation says for we, because we. God, forgive us because we. In other words, we are saying we will be wronged. That's the problem. That's what I'm doing with my left hand over here. That's the problem, right? Like we will be offended. We will be hurt. People will wrong us, so we need to forgive them. And we do that because we as people are recognizing the fact that we hurt others. You can't really, as a mature human being, expect forgiveness if you don't also admit that there are others that you have wronged and they need to forgive you. And particularly when we talk about God, if we're going to ask God for forgiveness, we need to recognize that, well, we have sinned against him. That's what asking for forgiveness is. And so we can't be the people. That's not the whole parable, right? Like, we can't be the people who are forgiven a lot. The forgiveness one is easy. Temptation one, equally easy. Don't lead us into temptation. Again, there's temptation in the world. We're asking God, don't put us in that room. Because there's some rooms you can't handle. There's nothing mature about thinking, it's fine all the time. Because guess what, guys? It's not always fine. There are things you need to, the Bible tells us to flee from temptation. There are times you can't handle a situation. And it is not mature, it is not adult to say, oh, I'll just handle everything. No, that's just called idiocy. If you think you can do it all you're going to do is fail over and over. Even the one that's really like blatantly obvious, your kingdom come, that certainly sounds like something God's doing, right? Well, again, we got the problem. If your kingdom's coming, that means the kingdom needs to come. Kingdom's not fully here. We get that. We can look around in the world. But also, remember that time Jesus said the kingdom is within you to a group of people? It's almost like the kingdom of God is lived out through us. And so us asking your kingdom come is us also asking God, may we live the kingdom in our own lives? The entirety of the Lord's Prayer is us identifying a problem and then asking God to help us be the solution. Which is to say, sometimes, not always. We'll talk about the not always. We've been talking about the not always. Not always. But sometimes prayer has nothing to do with anything but us. Sometimes prayer is not about changing the other person or changing the other circumstance or asking God to intervene and make it not rain or make somebody be healed. Sometimes often prayer is just us saying, look, life is really hard. The war is coming. The earthquakes are here. People are sick. Other folks are claiming you can follow them, and we shouldn't. Help me be strong enough to hold on to my faith in the craziness. There's stuff that needs doing. God, help give me a purpose so I know how I can help in this world. Help me to make bread. Help me to live out the kingdom. Help me to forgive others, because I recognize my own need for humility and grace and mercy. Help me to honor your name in the way that I live every single day. Sometimes prayer is about trying to change the world. But the Lord's Prayer is about us changing ourselves. Or maybe more specifically, us seeking God so God can change us. You see, I've said it a couple times in the series, we're not finished products. The whole point of prayer is that we're not done. And as Christians, sometimes we're bad about that. It's like, cool, hey, I got baptized, so I'm saved and I'm good. I prayed this prayer, so I'm saved and I'm good. Hey, I joined this church, so I'm saved and I'm good. Hey, I read my Bible, so I'm good. Hey, I believe the right stuff, so I must be good. And I vote the right way, and that's great. And I give to these charities, and I give to this stuff, and I give to that, and I volunteer. And we think, okay, we're done, we're good. But that's not the way that being a human is. Being human is understanding that we are always becoming something. Always. We are always in the process of becoming what we're going to be. And we can choose to do that intentionally. That rhymed, guys. Or we can just kind of let the world do it and just let what happens happen. I got to tell you, the second part is not usually awesome. Jesus asked his disciples to be intentional in who they were becoming and what they were doing, because there was going to come a day when they would need to lean on their faith in a way they did not understand. The disciples who lived this war, first of all, a good chunk of them still did die. But the ones who lived through it saw things that they were never meant to see. It's kind of the way war is. We're not really built to do this stuff to each other. And we do it, and then we're seemingly shocked when it changes us completely. Everything changes after this war. Judaism has literally never been the same since 70 AD. And Jesus needed them to be intentional about who they were going to be. Now, it may not always be dramatic as that, but it is dramatic. Like, we have wars, we have natural disasters, we have famines and pestilences and pandemics, and not to speak too ill of all of us, but we learned a couple years ago we are ill prepared for some of that. We are called to be intentional so we don't lose our faith, so we don't lose who we are. Because the world is terrible. But the worst thing that can happen as the world is terrible is that we lose who we are in the process. Because we can. We can lose every single part of who we are as people because of the way that the world is. And so Jesus teaches us to pray, and pray specifically that we may be strong in the face of difficulty, that we may be molded into the types of people who can hold on, who can do the right things, and who are the same people of faith in good times and bad times and all the in-between times. And so here we are. It's the third week of our series called Pray Better Prayers. As we talk about the Lord's Prayer, as we talk about the war between Israel and Rome, and we talk about the fact that the world is like this. Everything is difficult. We come to this conclusion, our third lesson from our series on praying better prayers. Our third lesson goes like this: we pray so that we may have the strength to stay faithful in a difficult world. We pray so that we may have the strength to stay faithful in a difficult world. We're going to sing a song. This is going to come forward. We give this invitation every week. If you want to get baptized, you should. That's swell. If you want to join the church, also swell. Let's talk about it at some point. Just let me know what you want to do. And other than that, look, we're just going to be the church that we are, and we're just going to try to serve the Lord the best way we can be. And that means that in our prayers, as we talk about this morning, in our prayers, we want to be the types of people who pray for strength and resilience, understanding that the world around us is never going to cooperate with our faith. And so we need to be the people we are, regardless, one way or the other. As we stand,